Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Delighted to welcome everyone back to the final keynote plenary, which is to be somewhat unusual. We have another dual performance as with our first keynote, and we have here from A Cupping a Cold both Professor Dr. Sasha Paulus and Dave Kearns, and I'm going to hand over to them.
Thank you very much. Sasha went one up on me by putting his picture on the slide so you know who he is. Hopefully I've seen you around the halls this week. I've been doing conferences like this for 25 years now. And it always amazes me that you get to the end, to the closing, and you realize that there was much more you wanted to do than you actually did do. You wish you could really multitask and be in multiple sessions all at the same time. The other impression, of course, for me is that after 25 years of doing this, I spend almost all of my time talking to vendors, reading their materials, talking to customers about what they're implementing, what problems they're having, and so forth. So I always feel that I'm going to be a little jaded when I come to these events, that I'm going to be hearing things that are not necessarily new to me, but simply reinforce what I already know. So it's always a pleasant surprise when I hear some things that I really hadn't expected to, and that make me think a little bit differently. I'm thinking of 3 incidents that happened this week that I want to tell you about. The first was during the opening keynotes. Dr. Barbara Mandel from Daimler, when she was supposed to be talking about BYOD, bring your own device, said the device wasn't important to her. It's the data, the information that's important, and you have to concentrate on the data and the information. Don't worry about the device. And that's something we need to think about. The other thing was, just this morning, I was talking to Deepak Taneja from Avexa, about their new product. He was showing it to me and saying that when looking at entitlements, it used to be that in the product, someone threw up, when you were selecting entitlements for someone or you're trying to find them for yourself, someone threw up a whole list, maybe an alphabetical list of these entitlements. 8,000, 10,000, whatever there happened to be. And you had to go through this list to find the ones that were appropriate for this given situation. They've changed it in version 8.5 so that there are now keywords associated with those. You no longer have to know what the entitlement is called. You simply have to know what it's associated with. Gives you a shorter list, makes it easier for you to choose. It's a different way of looking at it from the developer's point of view. And that was what I heard from Susan Morrow in our consumer identity session yesterday. She was adamant that we need more female designers for software because it's been proven that women take a more holistic approach to design than men do. We tend to be tunnel visioned. We tend to see the end point and make as straight a path as we can to it. Whereas women look at all of the things surrounding it. I'm sure, by the way, it was a woman who suggested to Deepak that they change the way they look at those entitlements. It's not a straight drive through, but a look at what the business needs to do in the end. And that's what I'm taking away from this week, that I've learned some new things. I learned that we need to look at everything we do from the business point of view, not from the technology point of view. We need to encourage more people from outside technology, including women, to get involved in the design, not necessarily drawing up the design, but just to make sure that their input is there when we're making these things up so that they are indeed easy to use when we get to the final end. It was a pleasure for me to be here, as it always is. It's very enjoyable to meet with old friends again. And it's great to learn something new. And I hope everybody here did learn something new while they were here this week. And if you didn't, come and talk to me about it, and I'll tell you what you missed, okay? Sasha, you want to?
Thanks, Dave. Great number of ideas and insight, especially the thing with the women building technology. I think this would immediately impact many of the software architectures that we have around, because indeed, as you say, we have a tunnel view, and probably that's the reason why we're not externalizing authentication, authorization so far. Women would think of this completely differently, would say, well, this is a job I can get rid of, so let's do it right from the start. So. Okay, so before giving my few thoughts, I planned this time to make the closing keynote a little bit differently. I'll be strolling around and ask a number of people what their primary, most shaking or most interesting insight they actually had this week. Sebastian, I will come to you in a minute. So. But in the meantime, before I do this, I would like to express in the name of the team, and hopefully also in the name of all participants, a big thank you for the organizing team, for Bettina Butmann and Leven Kara. Please stand up for a second. I think it was really, again, a wonderful organization for the rooms and the plans. There has some hassle been with the change of rooms, but I don't attribute the change of rooms to you two. That was due to a different type of acceptance for the content we had there. I apologize again for this, for having done this. Now let me go around and ask. I have some things in mind, but of course, but I'd like to get some views on the other people. Sebastian, what's your most interesting insight from this week?
I think that was Mike Neuenschwander's keynote that he gave, and he stated the most obvious. When we start managing identities and we centralize that, and we start needing more admins to do it, to get the job done, this is something that will just not work. We need to have a tectonic shift in how we try to scale up and scale out how we manage identities if we want to do it in the internet scale. So this is my key takeaway. We need to have something that really helps us get that done.
Okay, in other words, identity management doesn't have the economies of scale we need for getting further beyond the point we are today. Yeah, okay, that's indeed a valid point. Mike, what do you think is the most interesting insight of this week?
Well, I obviously am very interested in the cloud, and what I have seen this week is some very interesting nascent developments regarding identity providers and identity management in the cloud, and also about cloud aggregation services that seem to be appearing.
Thank you. Here's a guest I'm very interested. Dee, what is your takeaway of this conference? It's your first time, I guess, right?
Everything that Oasis did. No, it's not my first time to the conference. Actually, I think this is my fourth or fifth year. I attended a session today that discussed open APIs. As a representative of the standards community, this is very near and dear to my heart, so I really love that session. That was far and away my favorite. And that was not an Oasis session, by the way.
Okay. So, open API as a trend. Mr. Mansfeld, next one.
Yeah, coming as an infrastructure guy, from authentication to more and more business-driven with joint venture in the different regions of the world, to, of course, authorization in a federated and cloud-based way. And I think I've learned a lot, and let's see next year.
Okay, and the last one I'd like to ask is Jacques Beuys. Would you like to give you something about what you felt impressive at this conference?
Well, this is a difficult question, because I was certainly not the whole week here. A very small part of it, and half a day of that was mainly in the discussions that I organized myself. So, but one of the things that I was typically drawn by yesterday afternoon was the discussion, which I also mentioned this morning a little bit, on how to organize trust whether that should be in the centralized way or whether it should be in the peer-to-peer distributed way. And the point that by thinking about it, that I found that we shouldn't ask that question, but we should try to do it in a different way, somewhere in the middle. I think it got me much more clarity, basically, about what maybe the steps are to be in order to get further in this whole discussion about building trust platforms and the tools that we need all together there. So it certainly gave me some further steps in the discussion, and for the rest, I enjoyed very much the corridor discussions in this particular event.
Thank you, Jack. And of course, Nigel, last one I'd like to ask about your impression, content-wise, what you've heard, especially in your role as the chair executive of your organization.
Well, I've had the privilege, and I'm not sure how many other people have had this privilege, of sitting through every one of the plenary presentations. I have been required so to do. I suppose, two quick reflections. One is the power of ideas, and I like the notion that we begin with thought leadership. And thought leadership is what frames everything else. And the point that was being made about, that business must drive our thinking, not technology. Culture drives our thinking. Culture is central, business is central. Technology, increasingly, we're even beginning to see in technology circles, is a servant. And I think it's a problem that it's typically technology people who are making decisions about technology. And I think this is the point you were making about women's participation, more diversity in framing the questions. And the organization which I run in Washington, our motto is asking tomorrow's questions. It's all in the question. And I think this week we have seen some very creative solutions to questions which we know are important. My question is, what are the emerging questions going to be?
A very important point. So I think this is a very good takeaway. I add some thoughts that I have written down all over the last couple of days. So first of all, I had an interesting discussion late night at the bar. I was not at the ping reception, unfortunately, about whether things in these types of conferences, and was not explicitly mentioning EIC, is there really something new? So don't we hear the things every year the same, and we're going back and meeting the friends, but actually there's no new content? Well, actually, I skimmed through the stuff, I compared with my notes from last year, and you know what? There's a lot of new things. A very interesting, industry moving things like Skim, for example, as one important thing we didn't discuss last year at all. Life management platforms, we had this first initial presentation from Key last year, but this time we have a whole track on this activity and all the thoughts on ways of trying to have a privacy-centric, a privacy-aware, a privacy-by-design technology to work in the context of business applications and at the same time reflecting also the privacy of the citizens. I noticed also a term very interesting in the presentation of Kim Cameron in the on the first day about claims augmenter. Can you remember this? Claims augmenter? Very interesting concept where you have an initial authentication with a low profile authority. And then because for this transaction that is needed, you need additional a mixture of authentication or authorization which needs to happen before you go beyond that step and have access or have rights to execute. Things, ID anonymizer as a role in a role to play. This is really new. There's a part maturing, things we have been discussing at this conference and others, where from the way we discuss them, from the level of depth and the acceptance in the industry and customer organizations have been much put forward, like bring your own device, claims management, claims attestation, claims-based authorization, cloud security, of course, GRC now, as I remember one sentence of Theo Dumitrescu saying this morning, it took us, we changed the name for the identity and access stuff over the years every time with the new trend, and it took us 2 to 3 years to understand that GRC is something different, and left the term away again. So, but now GRC has developed as its own discipline, is very management-driven, of course, and not so much technology-driven. But it has its spot here on the conference, and very interesting people. So it's maturing. And also something I mentioned all over the different presentations, I saw that something we were discussing as a principle to follow, and always people were saying, well, actually, I don't see any acceptance in the market actually to do this, is the identity provider, service provider separation. Now, if you look at the speeches this year, most of them were starting where identity provider and service provider already separated. So this is reality. This is something we as a community have achieved over time. If you think back, Liberty Alliance 2001, first initial thoughts about having that separation actually going, and now 10, 11 years later, we are at the point where this is actually reality. And things that have been big topics at this conference, which are now gone or no longer people are really talking about, like provisioning. There was one presentation, 2 presentations on provisioning, but it's overcoming provisioning or getting from provisioning to today. So really backward facing, so to say, just using the term. And single sign-on. Have you had something discussing single sign-on these days? No. It's something people address. From Twitter, I've read the tweets over the week. I was not contributing for the sake of time, but I was reading them. Two things that I probably bear in my mind: bring your own identity. Interesting concept. Actually, this is reflecting reality, right? I mean, who said that? One of the people said that actually using identity, it was Kai Rannenberg this morning, saying that actually creating identities is a strange concept, because I mean, I am and I have my identity, so why should someone else create my identity, right? And the other term, other sentence from I forgot, from T-Systems, bring your own device brings your own vulnerabilities. It's also very interesting. And also a quote, more security requires partial identities. So getting this partial identity concept implemented. Okay, I have some more time for a few more thoughts. I personally liked very much also the speech of Emilio Mordini, at least the 2/3 of its presentation. I was not really understanding the movie, probably because I do not understand Italian. But what I really took away is that cloud, the way we are using words is very important. And we should think about this, and cloud as a term being the materialization of dreams as comparison to technology being the materialization of our process and day-to-day improvement wishes. Identity being the gold standard for e-money. Online anonymity is an oxymoron. Also something I noted. And there is no internet without future identity currency. Very, very interesting subject. So this goes way beyond technology. It even goes way beyond management aspects like GRC. It goes into what you said, Nigel, that it's important to think about future questions and to think about social context and economic aspects. And these are thoughts we should take away and lead us through the next year. So what actually will be the identity currency of the future? What will be the electronic currency? Will be identities electronic currency? I guess yes. We will see how we're going to be able to manage this over time. So this was my summary and my ideas I took away from the European Identity and Cloud Conference 2012. I'd like to hand over back to Nigel for the last few words.
Yes. thank you very much. Well, we have finished in a timely manner, and I was noting that the tweet stream had lagged. I think perhaps most of our tweeters have already departed, but it was good to have these engagements with the tweet stream and with the wider conversation as part of this closing. This is an interesting model for how one might close a conference. I'm learning all the time. We have a slide about next year's conference, is that right? So your attention is drawn, and you can pull out your calendars or PDAs or however you do your scheduling and get this in now before other things come in the way. For so many of us, we spend much of our time in conferences, and generally speaking, they arrange themselves so we can attend the ones we choose to. But just sometimes they conflict, which is another good reason for using Twitter, because here you can follow streams from 2 or 3 different events at the same time, which some of us have been doing for the last 3 days. It's been very good to welcome all of you here. I can't see what you're saying. Yes. Oh, I see. We have moved backwards 1,000 years. This is a profound move on the part of Cupping a Coal. We are seeking to gain a 1,000-year perspective, and therefore next year's conference we are moving back by a millennium to gain a broad view of the cultural and social issues involved in these technologies. And there will be medievalists giving the keynotes. Well, this is another new way to end a conference, and so thank you all very much.